Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Aaron Sheldrick. I work for Reuters. Today, we're very fortunate to have representatives from one of Japan's biggest workers' unions, focusing mainly on the small manufacturer sector, the sector that's always squeezed. They are the suppliers to the big manufacturers, and they constantly have cost-down pressure. And right now, we've just kicked off the annual Shunto salary negotiations, So we have, first of all, General Secretary of the Japan Metal Workers Union, Metal Machinery and Manufacturers Workers Union in the middle. On his left, we have General Secretary Miyamoto-san, and on Manaka-san's right, we have Fujikawa-san, the Vice President of the union. And over on my furthest right, we have someone who needs no introduction, our interpreter, Takamatsu-san. We'll hear some remarks from Manaka-san first, and then we'll open the floor to questions and answers. Can I just ask everyone to make sure you've turned off your mobile devices? And without any further ado, I hand over the mic to Manaka-san.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very glad you could attend our press conference of Spring Offensive. I am Manaka, President of JAM. This is the first time for me to give a press briefing in such a situation. I am a little bit nervous. Thank you for your understand your cooperation. ここまでが精一杯でございます。
So now I will speak to Japanese.
はじめに、我々 JAM の概要について簡単に説明します。
So I'd like to begin by explaining about our organization, JAM.
我々は1999年9月の9日に結成された労働組合です。
We are a labor union. We were established on September 9th, 1999.
我々の組織名は JAM と言いまして、Japanese Association of Metal, Machinery and Manufacturing Workers の頭文字から取ってます。
So as you can see, our name, JAM, is an acronym. It comes from Japanese Association of Metal, Machinery and Manufacturing Workers.
後ほども出てきますナショナルセンター連合の5番目の規模で日本の機械金属産業に働く仲間35万人が働いています。
There will be more information about this on the following slides, but we, of course, belong to Rengo, which is the National Trade Center in Japan, and we are the fifth largest organization within Rengo. We have about 350,000 members, and they are mostly in the metal and machinery industries.
組合本部を東京に置き、日本全国17の地方組織で運営しています。
So we have our headquarters based in Tokyo, and we also have 17 regional organizations that are distributed throughout Japan.
次に、アベノミクスの影響について簡単に触れます。
So I'd now like to speak briefly about the effects of Abenomics on our member unions.
そこのグラフにありますように、回復感は大手の方が高く、経常利益の増減についても100人未満、右のグラフですが、100人未満はマイナスです。
As you can see, the graphs are very, very clear. On the left-hand side, you have large corporations, and you see that they are seeing the benefits of the recovery that has been started by Prime Minister Abe Abenomics. However, if you look at the right-hand side graph, these are for organizations with less than 100 people, and you can see that in terms of ordinary or current or recurring profits, we are still seeing very low figures.
アベノミクスは、大手の方には効果が現れ始めておりますが、中小企業にはいまだ効果は現れておりません。
So I can summarize very simply by saying that we are seeing some positive benefits of Abenomics on larger companies, but in regard to small and medium enterprises, their effects are still unseen.
次に、売上高について分析をしています。
Now I'd like to do a brief analysis about sales.
売上高も中規模以上は増加をしております。
In regard to sales figures, we see that for medium to large companies, sales figures are beginning to trend upwards.
全体としてもまだ半分程度の企業が半分企業にとどまっております。
Having said this, however, if we look at small and medium enterprises, less than half are seeing upward trends.
次に、経常利益について分析をしました。
Now I'd like to talk to you a little bit about current profits, or ordinary or recurring profits.
経常利益の減少の一番の要因は、為替が円安に急激に触れたことによります。
The major reason that we have seen a decline in current profits, especially for small and medium enterprises, is that currency rates have fluctuated very drastically in a very short period of time. In other words, the yen has fallen very, very quickly.
急激な円安によって原油、鉄鉱石、アルミ、銅など原材料など輸入物価のアップが 62% を占めます。
As a result of the very sudden drop in the value of the yen, we've seen that the prices for crude oil, raw materials such as iron ore, aluminum, copper have risen tremendously. In other words, the import prices of these materials have risen some 62%.
次に景気の減少による需要減によっての売上の減少があります。
So I would like to also point out that these factors have led to decreased demand.
次に日本の企業の中において中小企業の位置づけを分析しました。
Now, I'd also like to touch upon briefly the position of small and medium enterprises within the larger realm of the business world.
日本には約400数十万社ありますが、その 99.7% が100人未満の中小企業です。
Many of you may know this, but over 4 million companies exist in Japan. However, 99.7% of them employ less than 100 people. In other words, they're small and medium enterprises.
また右のグラフにありますように、雇用労働者4000万のうち7割が中小企業で働いています。
And as you can see in the right-hand chart, about 40 million workers are in Japan, but about 70% of these total workers are employed by these small and medium enterprises.
日本の GDP は約500兆円弱ですが、その6割を個人消費が占めております。
Japan's GDP is a little less than 500 trillion yen at present. However, 60% of that comes from individual spending, consumer spending.
したがって、この中小労働者の消費意欲が日本経済の動向を左右すると言っても過言ではありません。
As a result, I do not think it would be an overstatement to say that the desire to spend on the part of workers for small and medium enterprises will determine whether the economy goes up or down. In other words, it will have a tremendous impact on the Japanese economy.
次に日本での賃金を分析をしました。
This chart shows you wage trends for small and medium enterprises in Japan.
このデータは 我々ジャム、先ほど申し上げた35万人の分析です。
This data comes from our member unions. As I mentioned, the JAM has member unions, and we have 350,000 members in total.
100人未満と3000人以上の賃金水準で6万円差があります。
If we look at two categories, if we look at small and medium enterprises, which employ less than 100 people on the one hand, and compare them to another group, large corporations that employ more than 3,000 people, we see that their wage levels differ by 60,000 yen.
後ほど触れますが、構造維持分でも大小で2500円の差があります。
I will talk more about this later, but there's also another concept called maintained wage curve, which means regular annual wage increases. And again, between small companies and large companies, the difference is about 2,500 yen.
したがって30年勤続しますと7万5000円の差がつく賃金制度になっています。
So the wage system as it currently exists is that if one is employed by a small and medium enterprise, then compared to a person working for a large enterprise, over 30 years, after 30 years, the difference increases from 60,000 yen to 75,000 yen.
また、年収で見た場合でも、賃金以上に一時金の差が大きく、年収で100万円から200万円もの差がついてしまいます。
So far, I've been talking about monthly wages. However, the difference between bonuses that are given by small companies and large companies are even greater in difference. The difference between a person working for a small company or a large company, the bonus can be as much as 1 million or 2 million yen different.
次に、日本における労働組合の特徴についてお話をいたします。
Now I'd like to speak a little bit about some of the particular characteristics of labor unions in Japan.
日本の労働組合は欧米の産業別組織と異なり、一企業一労働組合ということで基本となっております。
I think many of you are aware of this, but Japanese trade unions or labor unions differ from their Western counterparts in that in the United States and Europe, they tend to be industry-based unions, industry-wide unions. However, in Japan, it's fundamentally one labor union for one enterprise.
その単位組合が産業ごとに結集しているのが産業別労働組合です。
However, all of these different individual labor unions come together by industry, and these are what we call the industry-based unions in Japan, or confederations in Japan.
日本で代表的なところは、自動車総連75万人、電気連合60万人、そして我がジャム35万人ということです。
So in Japan, some of the most prominent trade unions are, I think, are listed here. First of all, the biggest one is the Jidosha Soren, which is the Confederation of Japanese Automobile Workers Unions. And then secondly, Denki Soren, which is the Japanese Electrical, Electronic, and Information Union. And then our own union, JAM, again, which has 350,000 members.
その産業別組織が集まって700万人を要するナショナルセンター連合があります。
And with all of these industry-wide, nationwide confederations coming together, we all together form Ringo, which has some 7 million members.
日本の労働組合は毎年2月から3月にかけて春闘という労働組合最大のテーマに取り組みます。
I think you're aware of this, but each year in Japan, the labor unions, trade unions come together and have wage negotiations with management in February and March of each year.
取り組みにあたっては、組合員の生活、日本経済の現状見通し、企業業績などを総合的に勘案します。
When we do wage negotiations, we look at the overall livelihoods, the daily lives of our workers. We look at their quality of life. We look at general wage levels and the forecasts for the economy. And then taking all of these factors into consideration, we decide on figures to negotiate from.
そして要求を組み立て、個別の労使が真剣に話し合い、賃金の引き上げ、 一時金、労働時間などを決める活動を全国的に展開します。
And once we have put together a fundamental scheme or a fundamental position, then we start negotiations on a nationwide basis. Each regional area working in conjunction with other regions, we work to try to negotiate wage increases. We try to negotiate other labor-related matters, such as, for example, working hours.
次にジャムの特徴についてお話をいたします。
Now I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the characteristics of JAM, my organization.
我々ジャムは自動車で言いますとトヨタ、日産、ホンダが中心であります。
When we talk about the automobile industry, basically many of our members are related to or have worked with major automobile manufacturers such as Toyota, Nissan, Honda.
電機連合は日立、東芝、三菱というような企業連を中心とした運営をしています。
Excuse me, the interpreter would like to correct herself. Jidosha Soden, which is the Confederation of Japanese automobile manufacturers workers, they are very closely related to those auto manufacturers I mentioned earlier. And as another example, the Electronics and Information Union is very closely related to large electronics manufacturers such as Hitachi, Toshiba, Mitsubishi.
自動車電機のように、資本系列といいましょうか、そういったものよりもジャムは同じ産業に働く他社も含めた労働組合で結集されています。
JAM is different from these two unions in that the automobile workers union and the electronics and information workers union are very much related to each other in terms of the companies that they work for being closely related in terms of capital tie-ups. In other words, they tend to be keiretsu-related companies that they work for. But JAMS is basically made up of unions who work for companies that are just in a particular manufacturing industry. They don't have any capital tie-ups between these companies.
JAM の主な産業をお話しいたします。
I will talk now a little bit about some of the major industries that we represent.
皆様のよく知っているような企業を紹介しますけれども、工作機械では大熊、東芝機械。
We have many different companies that our workers are employees of. For example, in terms of electrical machines, there are, for example, Okuma Toshiba Machine Company that is represented.
産業機械では小松、忠の代金があります。
Excuse me, that previous one was not electrical machines, but machine tool industries. Excuse me. And the second category would be industrial machines, represented by such companies as Komatsu, Japan Steelworks, Tadano Daikin.
精密時計分野ではセイコー、シーズン、カシオ、ニコンがあります。
And in the precision clocks or watches industry, we have Seiko, Citizen, Casio, Nikon or Nikon.
自動車部品では小糸製作所、ボッシュがあります。
For the automobile components industry, we have workers at Koito and Bosch.
軸受けベアリングでは NSK、NTN があります。
And in the bearings industry, we have NSK, NTN.
農業機械では久保田、ヤンマー、イセキなどがあります。
And for agricultural equipment or machinery, we have Kubota, Yammer, and Iseki.
というように大きく分けて15の産業の炭素が結集しています。
So I've just given you some examples of the industries that we represent. We represent about 15 major industries.
資本系列の影響を受けない独自の産業ごとの発展、組合員の労働条件の向上に取り組んでいます。
As I mentioned before, we basically are free of this keiretsu concept. We are free of capital tie-ups. We aren't influenced by such considerations. We work only to further the industry and to improve the working conditions of our union members.
また我々ジャムは全国に17の地方組織を持ち、地域での共闘強化にも取り組んでいます。
As I mentioned earlier, JAM also has 17 regional organizations, so we work very hard to strengthen organizations at the regional level, in a very cooperative way.
次に日本における賃上げの仕組みについて ご説明申し上げます。
I would now like to explain a little bit about how wage increases are realized in Japan.
そこのグラフにありますように、日本では多くの企業で1歳1年勤続を重ねるごとに習熟度に応じて昇給します。
As you can see by this ladder-like graph, the fundamental, or step ladder-like graph, the fundamental assumption in Japan by most companies is that for each year that you are employed by a company, your skills correspondingly grow. As a result, your wages also should grow.
その金額は4000円から7000円程度の金額で確立されているところが多くあります。
And as a general rule, the amount that your wages grow each year is 4,000 yen to 7,000 yen. These are monthly wages, of course.
その制度を運用し、労使で確認、その上にベースアップの要求をします。
So when we begin our negotiations, the first step is to confirm between labor and management that this fundamental sort of step system is the fundamental basis for all negotiations. In other words, there is going to be this fundamental regular wage increase on an annual basis. On top of that understanding, then we begin to negotiate a further wage increase, and this is what we call base up.
ジャムの具体的な要求についてお話しします。
I'll now speak about the particular demands that we at JAM are making this year.
ジャムの要求は先ほど申し上げた定期昇給に加えてベースアップ分として9000円としました。
As I mentioned earlier, the fundamental premise behind our negotiations or demands is that, first of all, we assume that there's going to be a regular wage increase. And on top of that, our base up or added extra wage increase request is 9,000 yen.
それではなぜ9000円なのかということについてお話しいたします。
So, of course, the question naturally arises, why 9,000 yen?
日本では昨年2014年4月の消費税引き上げが 5% から 8% に上がりました。
As you know, in April of 2014, the Japanese consumption tax was raised from 5% to 8%.
そのことによって交通機関、電力、ガソリン、食材などが値上がりしました。
As a result, transportation costs, for example, public transportation costs, the cost of electricity, the cost of gasoline, foodstuffs, everything rose.
したがってその分を賃金として確保できないと生活の質が低下することになります。
So it only stands to reason that unless wages increase to offset or cover these price increases, it means that the daily lives of our members, the quality of their lives will decrease.
我々としては組合員の生活の質を維持するということを基本にしました。
Our fundamental belief at JAM is that we must do everything in our power to maintain the quality of life of our members.
ジャムの平均賃金は約30万円ですから、その 3% として9000円をベアとしています。
The average wages of JAM's members are about 300,000 yen. So we made a calculation, 3%, which is the rise in the consumption tax, times 300,000 yen equals 9,000 yen. This is how we arrived at this figure.
ジャムには全国で1600ほどの組合があります。
We have about 1,600 member unions in JAM.
先月2月24日、賃金の引き上げを一斉に要求しました。
So last month, on February 24th, we immediately we launched nationwide start to our negotiations. In other words, presented our demands to the employment side.
2月24日現在では要求単素が930、58% となっています。
So actual wage negotiations have begun for about 930 of our 1,600 member unions. In other words, about 58%.
回答日は3月の17、18日を設定していますので、あと2週間の短期決戦となります。
Having said this, however, we have set as a date for accepting a response, an answer from the management side. We want that response by March 17th or 18th. In other words, it's going to be a very, very short negotiating and very, very intense negotiating period of about 2 weeks.
その要求を実現することが日本の経済を支え、日本を元気にするということで確信をしております。
We believe that the path that we are following is correct. We believe that these wage increases, if they can be realized, is the way to support the Japanese economy, the way to revitalize the Japanese economy.
ご清聴ありがとうございました。
Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you for that very lucid and broad, comprehensive explanation, which starkly lays out the situation you're facing. I'll now open the floor to questions. Please please avoid speeches and one question per person only. Although we don't have a lot of people in the room, so I'm sure there'll be time for more questions. And yes, sorry, as you no doubt know, please give your name and affiliation.
Daniel Leusink, Bloomberg News. First, I'd like to ask a point of clarification, which is the result of the Shunto of last year. How much average base up did your union actually achieve? And the reason for this is because it seems that the amount you're asking this year is very large. So my second question follows from that. Aren't you afraid to lose face and perhaps even support in the eyes of your own members if your union doesn't achieve a good result in this year's Shunto?
はい、ブルームバーグでございます。2つ質問があります。はじめは昨年の春闘でございますでしょうか。ベースアップはその平均どのぐらい達成されたんでしょうか。どのぐらいの金額ベースアップという数字ができたんでしょうか。と申しますのはこれが2つ目の質問なのでございますが、今回のそのベースアップの要求というのは非常に金額が大きいというふうに感じるわけなんでございますが、ご心配ではないでしょうか。もしそれを達成できないと、やはりその、顔が潰れちゃうんじゃないか、あるいはそのメンバーのその支援、支持を得られなくなるのではないかというようなご心配はないんでしょうか。
ブルームバーグさんありがとうございました。昨年の要求段階の比較をちょっとしてみたいと思います。
Thank you very much for your question. I'd like to begin by explaining our demands for last year.
昨年は、同時点で約8,000円の要求となっています。
We asked for about 8,000 yen base up wage increase last year, at this point of time last year.
その比較でいきますと、今年は14,400円となっております。ああ、ややこしいか。ベアか。ベアどれだよ。
I'm sorry, the interpreter doesn't quite understand. He's saying that in comparison to this.
ベアでいきますとね、
はい、
去年が約4,000円です。
4,000円です。今年は9,000円で、去年が4,000円だということですか。
要求が4,500円です。
要求基準が4,500円だったんですね。はい。
結果として要求したのが4,000円。
結果として得たのが4,000円ですか。
方針が4,500円なんだけど、はい、実際は全体で平均すると4,000円だった。
要求は4,000円。
Okay, sorry. Last year, the demand that we made was 4,500 yen, which is equivalent to the 9,000 yen that we have presented at present. But the average request, the wage increase request, was for the nation was actually 4,000 yen last year.
それと同じ比較をしますとね、はい、今年は9,000円という要求に対して約6,600円が平均として要求されています。これが結果です。
So, in comparison to the 4,500 yen that was the request demand that was set out by JAM, in actuality, it was 4,000 yen average that was requested by the member unions throughout Japan last year. And if we take similar numbers, then this year the demand presented by JAM is 9,000, but actually the wage increases that are being negotiated or demanded by member unions throughout Japan are 6,600 yen.
先ほど申し上げました1600の組合がありますんで、業績のその苦境っていうのかな、それによって結果的に差がついております。
I know it might be a little confusing, but as I mentioned earlier, the reason is because JAM is composed of 1,600 member unions, and these unions members work for various companies, and depending on the business results of these companies, there are naturally differences as to how much of a wage increase each individual member union can request. And so, although we have set out this very high figure, in actuality, the different individual unions make their own final decision as to how much to ask, and the result is the average this year is 6,600 yen.
それで給銭が高いというご心配なんですが、
でその前にその実際に要求されたのが平均でその4000ということですが、それが達成されたのが4000ということなんですか？去年の結果、4500円という数字を出されまして、そして平均で4000円交渉したということで、結果は、sorry, just asking for the actual result last year, sorry.
去年はですね、約1500円ですね、結果は。
1,500 yen, the actual result, wage increase. はい。い
いですか。
はい。
それで給銭高いという話ですが、先ほど申し上げ消費税が上がりましたんで、その電車にしろ何にしろ 3% は上がってます。
And in regard to your question about 9,000 yen being a very, very high figure, the actuality is, as I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest reasons is that the consumption tax went up 3%. And as a result, all costs have gone up, whether we're talking about train ticket prices, etc.
ですが、先ほど申し上げたように、経営者に対して組合の生活の質を維持するということで、給銭については、真剣に話し合いたいと思います。
So we believe that we have a very, very strong argument to present to management. We want to be able to maintain the level of people's daily lives. In other words, the quality of lives of our members. As a result, we believe that this is a good figure to demand.
交渉ごとですから、どの程度、取れるかは精一杯頑張りたいと思います。
I know your question probably will be, what do you think we could be able to achieve this year? And it really depends on every single negotiation, and we're just working very, very hard for each single negotiation, is all I can say at this point.
Sorry, perhaps clarification. Is the 9,000 yen, is that could we say it's your recommended increase that you send out to your member unions? Or would that be the way? I'm still a little bit unclear on it. I'm sorry.
そうですね。ちょっと仕組みがよくわからないんですけど、その9000円という話が出ておりましたので、これがJAM のすべての所属労働組合がそれを要求するのかなと、また単純に解釈しているものが多いと思うんですが、つまりこれはあくまでもJAM の方からこれをお勧めする、これが一番提案するっていうようなことでございましょうか。Yes, we apologize for the confusion. It is the figure that we recommend to our member unions.
Thank you very much for the clarification. Who would like to ask the next question, please?
Good afternoon. My name is Kirk Spitzer. I'm an American journalist. I work primarily for Time Magazine and USA Today. Manaka-san, I'm curious what you think overall, in general, about Abenomics. Do you think it's working? Do you think it's going to work? Is it good for the country? Is it good for everybody in the country? Or is it going to create a country of haves and have-nots, rich people and not quite so rich people? Please just take a couple minutes and tell us what you think.
はい、私はタイム誌あるいは USA Today に記事を書くアメリカのジャーナリストでございます。質問なんでございますが、アベノミクスをどう評価されますでしょうか。これはちゃんと機能していると思いますでしょうか。それとも機能してないと思いますでしょうか。そしてこれは国にとって日本にとっていいものだと思いますでしょうか。そして日本の国民すべてのためにいいものでしょうか。それとも格差をかなり拡大させるものだと思いますでしょうか。全体的にどういうような 印象をお持ちでございますでしょうか。
はい、よろしいですか。アベノミクスの評価は、富っていうか、なんて言ったらいいかな、富裕層、富裕層にとっては、例えば株価が上がりました、あるいは輸出型大手企業については業績が良くなりましたということで、一面評価をされる方も多いわけですが、先ほど申し上げたように、我々中小の労働者の組合ですから、そういった意味ではまだそのアベノミクスの効果って言いましょうか、出ておりませんし、長すぎる、むしろ先ほど申し上げたように、円安に触れたことによって、いわゆる原材料価格の高騰による業績圧迫の方が大きいです。でそのことによって格差が拡大をするというふうに危惧をしております。
So certainly when we look at Abenomics, I think for a certain percentage of the population, though people who are, I would consider to be wealthy, for example, people who hold stocks have seen stock prices rise. They've enjoyed the benefits of Abenomics. Also, large companies that are basically exporting goods, they have seen for exporting goods, the falling yen has helped their sales. So it is certain that some commentators have rated or evaluated Abenomics quite highly. But as I mentioned earlier, we are a labor union representing small and medium enterprises, and for us the situation is very, very different. We are not yet feeding the positive benefits of Abenomics. In fact, if I were to say things more clearly, as I mentioned a little bit earlier in my speech, we're actually feeding the very negative effects of the falling yen. Because of the yen value decreasing, we're seeing the prices of our raw materials skyrocket, and that is putting very, very much downward pressure on the company's business results for small and medium enterprises. So in response to your question, I believe that we have great anxieties that this kind of Abenomics, this kind of situation could actually lead to greater wealth disparity.
先ほど休戦の域が高いというお話がありましたが、格差を縮小するために底上げという意味も含んでおります。
You mentioned earlier that you thought our original demand of 9,000 yen was rather high. It was high, and it is high, but we have behind it the fundamental idea that we must do something to shrink this wealth disparity. And the way to shrink or deal with this wealth disparity is to raise the lower level wage earners.
Yes, please.
ロイター通信の中川と言います。今年の春闘に向けての業績の環境なんですが、先ほどおっしゃった円安コストは確かにマイナス要因なんですが、一方で原油安は今年にかけて去年からもう半年以上下落を続けてますので、原材料価格とかいろんなメリットがあると思います。ですから円安によるコストアップを相殺する程度の大きさになるかと思いますので、決して業績環境は去年より悪くないんじゃないかと想像するんですが、そのあたりいかがでしょうかというのが1点と、もう一つは中小企業人手不足が非常に深刻だと伺ってます。ですから、今年の春闘では人手不足を解消、人材確保のために賃金を引き上げるというインセンティブは企業側にあるはずなんです。それを踏まえると去年より賃上げ率は上がってもおかしくないかなと想像するんですが、その点はいかがでしょうか。
I'd like to mention two things in regard to the Shinto, the spring offensive environment that you're facing this year. In comparison to last year, I'm wondering if you might actually be in a more advantageous position than you were in last year. For example, you've talked about some of the negative results of negative effects of the falling yen. Yes, raw material prices have gone up, etc. But at the same time, we see that crude oil prices have fallen drastically over the last 6 months or so, and maybe that will offset the increase in raw materials. sales. So in other words, the actual business results of the companies that represent your members' employers are not necessarily so bad. Also, another concern of small and medium enterprises we have heard in Japan is that there's a lack of staff, a lack of personnel. And so there seems to be probably a great incentive on the part of management to raise wages in order to be able to draw more and better staff. So given these two factors, I think that you're actually perhaps in a better position, or at least not in a worse position in comparison to last year.
そこのグラフに示しましたように、一番下が中規模なんですね。一番下が。
If you look at this graph, at the very bottom we have, we're having the smallest small and medium enterprises, the smallest companies.
その上がいわゆる小規模、零細。
And above that you have the smaller companies, slightly larger.
ですからここにありませんが、この下に大企業あるとすると、大企業の方がやはり増えているという結果がまあ想像はできます。
And I'm sorry, these only show the small and medium enterprises. It doesn't show the results for the sales and current profits for the larger enterprises. But if we had a similar graph, you would see that the numbers are very, very different. In other words, the benefits, the sales and the current profits for those larger enterprises are much higher.
ですから、ジャムは先ほど1600の会社、あるいは中小が8割と言いませんでしたが、中小が多いという話をしましたんで、全体的にはそこのグラフにありますように 49.9 ですけど、半々なんですね。
As I mentioned earlier, JAM is composed of about 1,600 labor unions, in other words, representing people who work for about 1,600 companies. The majority are small and medium enterprises. And as you can see, it's about 50-50 for small and medium enterprises. In other words, some are seeing about half are seeing increases in sales, half are seeing increases in current profits, and half are not.
ですから、先ほど15の主な業種があるというお話をしました。
And I mentioned earlier that we represent about 15 major industries.
例えば好調なのは自動車部品関係は、輸出の完成車に伴って好調だと思います。
And so again, the situation differs according to the industries. For example, if we look at the automobile components manufacturing industries, you see that that is basically an industry that is geared toward exports, and they're seeing an increase in their sales and their profits.
一方、鉄鉱石を輸入して溶かして製品にしてという鉄鋼関係は原材料費の問題と、もう一つはエネルギー、電力の値上がりによってやっぱり企業コストは上がってますんで厳しいと思います。
But on the other hand, you have companies that basically import iron ore, raw materials, melt it, and create steel products. These kinds of companies are seeing not only the cost of raw materials go up, the iron ore go up, but also seeing their energy costs electricity costs going up as well. They are suffering.
それから中小企業の人手不足のお話がありましたけれども、確かに、ミスマッチといいましょうか、採用と応募の関係でうまくバランスが取れてないと思います。特に中小企業の方は、賃金も低いという実態がありますんで、なかなか新卒者が応募しないという現実はあります。
And you also mentioned the lack of personnel, a lack of staff. That is a very big problem for small and medium enterprises. I think there is kind of a mismatch between job applicants and job offers. As you know, small and medium enterprises generally have, as I mentioned earlier, lower wage levels in comparison to larger enterprises. Therefore, very few new graduates from either high school or college want to enter small and medium enterprises.
そういった現実もありますんで、我々労働組合としてはその賃上げができるような企業体力にするべく、先ほど申し上げた企業コスト、これを製品価格に転嫁できるように企業努力をしてくれというふうにも言ってきましたし、消費税が上がった際には国に対しても3ポイントアップ分をしっかりチェックをしてくれと いうふうに申し上げてきました。
チェックする、しっかりチェックするってどういう意味？
ちゃんと 3% が価格に転嫁できているか監視というか。
So this is the reality that small and medium enterprises are facing. And so as a result, we as the labor union representing them have worked very, very hard to try to push these small and medium enterprises to be able to raise their wages to solve these staffing problems. One way that we have encouraged enterprises to be able to raise their wages is to transfer these increased costs of raw materials, energy costs, etc., to transfer these costs to the final finished product. In other words, to add that price to the final finished product price. Also, when the consumer tax went up by 3%, we also made an appeal to the government to ensure that they check to see that that 3% increase had really been passed on to the consumers, the end users. In other words, that the 3% was not increase was not forced to be absorbed by the small and medium enterprises.
ただ日本の商慣行といいますか取引はやっぱ企業の大小によって力関係が現実的にありますんでなかなかコストプッシュ分を上乗せするというのは大変難しい厳しい環境にあります。
So these are the appeals that we are making. However, but the reality in Japan is very, very, as you know, much more severe because of what we might call Japanese business practices. Depending on whether you belong to a large organization or a small organization, the power difference is very, very great. And so even though from a logical point of view, from an ethical point of view, we can say that these price increases for raw materials, energy costs, consumer tax increase should be pushed on from the smaller companies to the larger companies and to the end consumers, because of the power imbalance, it is very, very difficult for small and medium enterprises to get that done. In other words, they end up having to absorb these costs.
Who else would like to ask a question? You don't need to come up to the mic as well. We'll bring it to you.
立花と申します。フリーランスです。先ほどアベノミクスのですね、被害者という感じで企業の方も資材の関係とかで業績が上がっていないということでした。それから一方で大きい9000という要求を出すのはですね、物価等も非常に上がっていると。それからアベノミクスによる格差を少しでも縮小する是正するという意味で大きい要求を出すんだということでしたけども、客観的にお話を伺っているとその業績の上がってないですね会社に大きいものを要求するっていうのは非常に無理があるっていうかその格差の是正の要求を業績の上がってない会社に対して要求するっていうのはもとより不可能じゃないかと思うんですけども、そういう意味ではですね会社側と労働者が一緒になってですねアベノミクスの被害を受けている犠牲者だということであればむしろ一緒に隊列を組んでですね政府に対してそういう企業であるとか労働者に対するサポートあるいは補填のですね何か措置をするようにという要求を一緒になってする方がいいんじゃないかというふうに思いますけどもそういう発想はお持ちになってないのかどうかということをお伺いして。
I'm a freelancer. You've talked about some of the difficulties of Abenomics. You've talked about the fact that many of the SMEs and the workers that are employed there are some perhaps victims of Abenomics or of the negative effects of Abenomics. And you've explained your rationale behind this 9,000 yen, which is a very, very large wage increase request, demand. And you've talked about wanting, however, to be able to offset the negative effects of the consumption tax, and you want to shrink wealth disparity, etc. But having heard all of this, my end impression is that when you talk about some of these small and medium enterprises that are suffering so much in terms of their business results, having these labor unions present such a very, very large wage increase demand, it creates a very, very impossible situation. In fact, it's not really going to help or try to resolve these wealth disparity problems that you're talking about. I wonder if you have ever thought about this different approach, which is for small and medium enterprises, both management and the workers, to come together and explain to the government as a concerted effort that we are suffering and that we need some kind of help, we need some kind of perhaps perhaps some kind of complementary help, this kind of approach might be more effective. Have you ever considered that?
業績の上がってないところに9000は高いんじゃないかと、こういうことなんですが、約1600社ありますんで、半分ぐらいはいいところもあるんです。ですからまだこのデータは58% しか要求を出しておりませんが、小さいところは正直厳しいと思います。ただ我々は労働組合ですから、要求を組むにあたっての基本的な考え方、何を根拠に要求を組むかということになれば、やっぱり生活を第一義に考えています。
So I guess what you're basically saying is, isn't the 9,000 yen figure rather high? And as I mentioned, however, we have 1,600 companies that we're negotiating with. And as you can see from this small and medium enterprise chart that I showed you earlier, sales and current profits, about half of them are doing fairly well. I also mentioned that as of February 24th, only 58% of our our member unions had actually begun negotiations, had actually presented demands, wage increase demands, to management. So we're watching to see what happens. And to be very, very honest, for the very, very small companies, the situation is very, very severe. I will not deny that. But we believe that our fundamental role as a labor union is to put together a kind of philosophy or a concept, a fundamental thinking behind making a particular request, and we believe, or demand. And we believe that the fundamental basis for a demand is we need to be able to protect the quality of life of our members.
実際に交渉が始まりますとね、要求の根拠は何ですかというふうに企業側からは聞かれます。
This is not just sort of idle thinking. The reason is that when one actually begins negotiations, almost the first question that comes up from management is, on what do you base this demand? Why have you arrived at this figure?
その時に根拠のない、例えば5000円とか4000円とかいうものでは交渉にはなりません。
And if at that time you're not able to respond in a logical and convincing manner, this is the reason that we have demanded it so and so. But if you simply just take, for example, an arbitrary figure such as 5,000 yen or 4,000 yen and have no specific reasons for choosing that particular figure, you already are going to lose that negotiation.
我々は物価が3ポイント上がってますんで、去年の先輩が食べたパンと同じパンが食べたい。そのためには 3% の要求が必要なんですという根拠です。
Basically, we say that compared to the same time last year, the CPI, Consumer Price Index, has gone up 3 points. And basically, we want to be able to buy the same bread, eat the same bread that we were able to purchase last year. And we want to be able to cover the costs of buying that same bread.
ただ、これは交渉事ですから、その会社の業績等の見合いで満足いくものになるかどうかはこれからの交渉にかかっています。
But again, these are all individual negotiations, and each labor union faces a different company, a different management, with different company business results for that company. So what kind of eventual final results will come out of these negotiations, we must watch and wait.
Thank you. Daniel, you have another? Oh, please, yes, please.
ちょっと補足説明させてください。今先ほどのご質問で、労使ともに政府に対するその要求ですとか改善何かないかというご質問だったんですが、ジャムとしては昨日もですね、全国43,000社ほど加盟されていらっしゃる中小企業家同友会という経営団体がございます。でそことともに中小企業、これ3年前に閣議決定された中小企業憲章を法制化をするという取り組み、それから各自治体では中小企業基本条例、そこで中小企業の雇用ですとか労働条件ですとか、あるいは公正取引、こういったものを労使共通の課題として今取り組みを進めています。
はい、すみません、検証って何でございますでしょうか。
基本法みたいなまだ法制化されてなくて閣議決定で止まってしまってます。
はい、3年前ということですね。
3年前。
はい、ごめんなさい。So, in regard to your question about maybe another approach is necessary where the management and workers for small and medium enterprises cooperate and make a concerted appeal to the government for some kind of help. Actually, yesterday, JAM spoke with an organization which is composed of 43,000 small and medium enterprises. It's kind of a doyukai or a keidan line for small and keidan and for small and medium enterprises. And we talked about the fact that we discussed the fact that we wanted to make a concerted effort and ask the government to make into law an idea that was passed by a cabinet resolution 3 years ago but has stopped. And it would be a law that would help promote small and medium enterprises in various ways in terms of helping with employment, helping with labor conditions, also ensuring that there is fair trade involving small and medium enterprises. This would all be done through different local regional directives, but this is a law that we would like to eventually see passed. It's a basic law on small and medium enterprises.
Do you have time for one more question?
あと一つぐらい質問をお受けできますでしょうか。
Daniel.
Yes, Daniel Leusink of Bloomberg News. Thank you for this time. Just very briefly, two things I'd like to ask actually. First is about Manaka-san's own background. I assume you've made a career in the metal industry yourself. Can you tell a little bit about what kind of company you worked for and what you're doing now besides the labor union activities? And also, very briefly, if the yen stays around the current level, what kind of trickle down or spillover do you expect from Abenomics? Thank you.
はい、またブルームバーグですが、最後の質問、2つでございます。真中様、ご自身のバックグラウンドについてちょっとお話しいただけますでしょうか。今までどういうようなお仕事をされてこられたのか、そしてこのジャムのお仕事もされていると思うんでございますが、それ以外の活動、お仕事とかはなさっているんでしょうか。で、2つ目の質問でございますが、はい。今、その円安でございますが、今の円ドル水準がこのまま維持されるということになりますと、どのようなそのトリックルダウン効果というのを期待できると思いますでしょうか。
トリクルダウンの期待か。まず初めの方からいきますが、私は今59歳です。
So I'd like to begin by saying I'm 59 years old.
約30年間組合の執行委員をやっています。
I've been working as an executive officer for labor unions for about the past 30 years.
ジャムの会長のほかは連合の副会長。
I'm sorry, I'm the chairman of JAM, but I'm also the vice chairman of Rengo, the umbrella organization for all industrial unions.
それから自動車とか電気とかある金属労協 JCM の副議長をやってます。
I'm also I guess it would be vice chairman of the JCM, which is an organization for, Metalworks and Machinery, the interpreter believes, it's the Japan Council of Metalworkers Unions.
それから行政機関といいましょうか、労働政策審議会、わかりますか？労働政策審議会の委員もやっています。
I'm also a member. 今現在もということですか。I'm also a member of a government deliberative organization, which would be literally translated as the Labor Policy Deliberative Committee.
円安はどうせよかな。
そもそもトリクルダウンそのものがもう機能しない。円安であろうが円高であろうが。
トリクルダウンというお話がありましたが、私どものところまでは円安になっても回ってこないんです。で、逆に円高になるとコストダウンしろというふうに言われてきますんで、いつも厳しいと。 自分に答えてください。
So in regard to the trickle-down effect question, as I mentioned earlier, if the yen stays low, that if it has a very little value, then we don't ever really see the effects of the trickle-down effects. On the other hand, if the yen were to rise, small and medium enterprises have great pressure put upon them to hold down costs. So whether the yen goes up or whether the yen goes down, it's always difficult for us, is I guess the conclusion that I can say.
Thank you very much. Then we've run out of time. I think it's fair to say that the jury is still out on the trickle-down effect. There's one thing left for me to do, and that is to give the three speakers, and I'll give them to them in a moment, honorary membership to the FCCJ for a year. And if you succeed in your negotiations, perhaps you can come to the bar and celebrate. Thank you very much.
ゲストスピーカーの皆様には1年間有効の名誉会員証を差し上げますのでぜひ遊びに来てくださいということでございます。And Mr. Manaka also wanted to explain that he was wearing a red tie to show that he is full of battle fever.
Thank you very much.
ありがとうございます。Thank you.